Merci, Didier. Good morning. Now we start the working session. This is the first one, and before lunch. So literally, we will give you some food for thought to continue the 2 days endeavors to talk about the transition. The first session will reflect on the overarching issues that were presented by the keynote speakers in the morning, and we will further think about the issues such as readiness, what readiness means for children, for educators, for parents, and for early childhood education and care institutions. So let me welcome first the keynote speaker of this first session, Sir Kevin Collins. Please welcome Sir Kevin Collins on the stage. So Sir Kevin is the Chief Executive of the Education Endowment Foundation, who is actively supporting the teaching and learning of young people and children, and also providing interesting instruments and tools to help improve the development of young children. And Sir Kevin Collins has been serving for over 30 years in different functions for the public services, and recently he has been in this chief executive position in the Education Endowment Foundations, but also he has the academic background specialized in literacy development, but also teaching as a visiting professors in different institutions, including Institute of Education in London. And he was knighted in 2015 for his remarkable service to education. So we are honored to have you as a keynote speaker. Please, Sir Kevin.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everybody. I always find it remarkable to stand at places like this because I think the key thing in anything that I've done is that I started my life teaching in early years and in reception. And the idea that I would ever have stood up in a place in Paris and talked about what I do would have been a fantasy. But that is the wonder of education as a career. It takes you on all sorts of journeys. And today's already been a good day because I'm very interested and committed to play as part of life. I think we talk about it often in children, but we don't do it enough ourselves. And so when I arrived in Paris this morning, having got up to get the 5:30 train from London, I noticed the taxi queue was completely mad. There was many people but no taxis. So I decided to jump on one of these motorbikes. And 3 things happened. I made a friend called Mark. I invested huge trust into my friend called Mark. And we had a high-risk adventure as we weaved around the periphery on our way here. It was play, because play requires risk, and we should do it more often, every day. Now, maybe not that, but anyway, and by the way, he gave me his number, so now I've got a friend forever. It's going to be great. I'm going to text him every time I come to Paris. What I'd like to do is share with you some of the insights we've been gathering at the EEF, and more broadly our work globally, because we work in many countries now, to try and address this issue of getting schools ready for children. It's a nice play on words, school ready, children ready, schools ready. It does matter how we say it, and it is about schools being ready, but it is also about children being ready. I'm not going to say that doesn't matter. It's about both things hand in hand. I'm trying to work out how I move the slides along. How do I make it happen? Is it some kind of thought pattern? Oh, no. This high-tech place, it could be. Anyway, I'm not going to spend too long on some of the slides. Oh, okay. I'm not going to spend too long on some of the slides because it reiterates the work this morning. I want to get some practical tools. I think some of what we're talking about is now self-evident. We must stop preaching, if you like, to the choir. We know that high-quality education benefits young children at the earlier stages, and we know it's particularly beneficial for those that come from low-income families. And for me, the biggest challenge in education in my own system is not access so much, it's the quality for those who need it most. There are huge variations in outcomes because you have to be born to a family of low income, and we need to close that gap. Social mobility, people mentioned it earlier. However, we need to be thoughtful about that early years setting. Someone said it again this morning, that there's too much variation in the quality that children receive. How do we get more reliability in what we do? Now, I don't think reliability comes about through national legislation or by more accountability. I think it comes about because people who are in settings, who work with children, understand more about what works. They make better decisions. In England, we have this issue, and I'm just going to do 2 quick slides to bear this point out, and I think this is true in many, many countries. When children come to school or arrive at education and they come from low-income families, that's 20% of the children in England, roughly. I'm calling that group who are eligible for a free school lunch. They start behind their peers. Now, you'd hope that what happens at school through social justice is you narrow that gap. But in many, many parts of the world, and we're not alone, in fact, in nearly all the developed countries in the world, the gap widens while you're at school. So by the time you leave school, the gap's even wider, and that creates huge opportunity risks on health, well-being, economic. Everything plays out because of that growing gap, and we need to work out how we narrow it. Now, the gap, in England, we make a judgment about schools based on people going to look at them independently. We call it Ofsted. Schools no, they don't really like it. Someone comes into your school and makes a judgment. You'd have thought that the gap would be narrower in schools that these people judge to be good. In fact, from this chart, you can see that school quality doesn't necessarily narrow the gap. We need to deal with this much earlier before children get to school. And finally, on just a bit of data, giving schools just more money or giving early years more money, you need enough, but more money doesn't seem to have a binary relationship to improving quality. It's not a sort of axiomatic that you just give someone more money and the quality goes up. It's about what they do with the resource. So we need to think harder about how do we spend resources well. In England, we face a period of austerity. There's not a lot more public money. We need to spend the money we've got well rather than expecting there just to be more. I'm going to miss that slide out. It seems to me that we had this morning, and this reason I'm missing this slide out is I wanted to dwell on what I heard this morning, which I thought was so, so interesting. For me, it's all about the relationships that we need to build in the system that we all work in. And I've got 3 particular partners I want to talk about this morning. I think the first partner are those the most important in my view, I'd say this, wouldn't I, are the people that work with children directly every day. The people that serve our children and the people that are running our settings and our schools. The second partners are those that generate great evidence and great information or wisdom, as I might like to call it, around what works and what doesn't. And then the third partners are organisations like the one that I run, a charity, it could be a government, it could be a charity, it could be an agency, who tries to broker that relationship. Now, the reason you have to broker that relationship is because in many systems in the world, in education, unlike, say, medicine, the relationship between those who generate evidence and those who use it isn't very well formed. There is a gap, and we need to bridge it. We need to actively bridge it, and we need players whose jobs it is directly to bridge, to bring those 2 groups together, because they don't come together in our profession, certainly in the countries that I'm working with, naturally. We need to build that relationship. So I'm very interested in the relationships between these players, but it seems to me that that's where the answers may rest, how to improve our system and get more reliability. It doesn't rest waiting for someone in government to write some kind of report. It's really about what we learn together. And I want to share with you how we're trying to bridge that gap in the UK. There are 3 activities that seem to be important if you're going to bring evidence to bear or bring wisdom to bear to try and improve what you do. So you can make better decisions. You can make the kind of decisions that people make in the very high-performing institutions. How do you bring their decisions, the way they work, to inform your professional work rather than uninformed professional work? How do you make it more informed? And the 3 things that we've decided to focus on, first of all, let's bring to the table what we already know. Mark mentioned earlier this morning, and Mark's work is fantastic in the earlier panel. Mark mentioned earlier this morning 2 or 3 studies. Now, the trouble is, too often, people walk onto a stage or walk into a room and say, I have just done a study and I'm going to top trump, if that makes sense to anybody, I am going to top trump any other study that's been done before. And I simply don't believe that's how evidence works or knowledge is built. Knowledge is iterative. It's about building on each other's learning. You build it up, and I'll explain how we do that through synthesis. The second thing that we do is we realize that there's huge innovation. There's huge missing gaps that we need to keep generating new knowledge about. We need to keep innovating and learning for all sorts of reasons we'll come into later on. And then finally, and the most difficult, is once you've got knowledge that is secure, how do you encourage people to adopt it? How do you encourage someone to adopt it and bring it into the way that they work with children? When I work with children, and I still do this kind of work, quite a lot of my interactions are very much now bound in my identity. They're who I am. How do I possibly change the way that I begin to talk to children because some evidence has told me that it's much better to have long, sustained dialogue rather than some of the short dialogue I might have had in the past? It's very hard to change your professional practice because you're asking someone to change who they are. It's easy to change the kind of bookends, I call them, how they assess, endless assessment, or how they plan. They're easy, but they're not important. Well, they are, but they're not as important as what somebody does on the run with children. And yet that's the hardest thing to change. How do you get people to adopt new behaviors in their practice, change their own professional identity? So the tools we've developed, the first is called the Teaching and Learning Toolkit. This essentially has trawled the evidence around the world. It's global. Unfortunately, it's slightly biased because a lot of the international research that's not written in English or in European languages is ignored. We need to get on top of that and get a much broader evidence base. But we've trawled the world's evidence since 1980, looked for what we call experimental designs, and pulled those together and synthesized them. Now, what that means is we produce this thing called a learning and teaching toolkit. There are well over 1,000 studies underneath this page, 1,500 studies or so. We've identified a set of themes. There will be more themes. And said, on average, when you read all the studies and you pull them together, what do they tell you? What do they tell you makes the biggest difference to children's outcomes? What do they tell you about how much it costs to bring that thing to life in a setting or a nursery? And what do we know about how strong the evidence is? So when someone tells you that something around, when there's only one of these padlocks in the third column, the second column coloured in, and they tell you they know a lot about it, play-based learning is an example. The truth is, there isn't enough research. We need more. We're working from a narrow evidence base. The more padlocks we can get coloured in, the more confidence we can have about the evidence underpinning it. And quite frankly, in early years, we need more evidence. Just to show you how this works, these are all the studies that underpin the parental engagement theme. Well, not all of them, a number of them. And as you can see, that different studies say different things. They have different levels of impact. Now, you might look at the study on the very far right-hand side, one that's over at 0.5, and say, there's the study. There's the one that I'm backing because it's a higher, and I love parental engagement. But then someone else says, hang on a minute, I'm backing the study over here because it's slightly, it's a much smaller effect size. Where do you put your money? Where do you put your bet if you're running a setting? Well, what we think you do is you look around the average, you bring it together. You begin to build a sort of collection of knowledge and say, on average, this looks like something that really makes a difference. And you get yourself to something more like sense rather than just trying to back one horse rather than another. Once you've done the synthesis, and we can talk about this later on, and that toolkit's all, by the way, translated into Spanish and Portuguese, and we've just translated it. We're just translating it now to Japanese. It's widely and freely available to teachers. The school element of it has more than 15,000 studies underneath it. It's just a way of bringing to the table what we already collectively have learned. I'm not taking sides in any of it. I'm just saying let's start from what we all know collectively rather than start in a bit of a biased way sometimes. The second thing you look at is how do you build more evidence? Where are there gaps? Now, what's been interesting to me is that the creativity in our system all around the world is huge. But the innovation isn't necessarily disciplined. How do you bring the innovation in a way where you put it through what we call disciplined processes, randomized controlled trials, experimental studies? And we've got many, many of these. In fact, 1 in 3 schools and early years settings in England is now involved in a randomized trial we run. That's well over 10,000 schools and settings, over 1 million children. Our profession is much more susceptible to rigorous methods than previously we might have thought. And you can ask all sorts of questions. We've asked 170, so I can't list them, but I will show you some of the early years ones that we've done. And because we're as an independent broker evaluating this, and not the person who's come up with the idea, we will publish without fear or favour the outcome. There's no bias in publication when an independent broker takes on the responsibility. We will ask questions, as you'll see here. There are many others. We did a fantastic study here with Nuffield on early language. This is about the way you develop oral language in classrooms and the way you then link that to literacy, but from an oral language base. You can see that we had more than 4 months progress in a controlled study for the children who received that intervention against those who didn't in a controlled randomized trial. Now that makes you think as someone, that's promising, that's worth looking at. So typically for us, we're doing it again even bigger to see if that event holds when you now run it with hundreds of settings rather than the 120 or so that were in that study. So you do it bigger and bigger. So we're beginning to build knowledge that we might understand as something we can trust. Because that's how you get someone to change the behavior, when they trust you. And how do you build that trust? And I think you need secure knowledge to do it. It's interesting for us to remember that some things we thought were good, we all liked intuitively, don't work. And we need to know that. Because there's a lot of time spent and wasted on things that aren't making the difference we believe they might. How do we know for sure, with some kind of security, that the thing we're spending our time on, our effort, actually makes a difference? All too often in early years settings and schools, we stop doing something because somebody has finally retired and now we're allowed to stop doing it. Not because we have systematically reviewed it and said, you know, that isn't worth the investment and money we're putting in. We might love it, but you know, it doesn't make the difference we thought it would make. How do we know? I think is critical. Some of the ones we're running now, and I've put this slide up just to show you something about the size of the trials. The other thing about trust is, there's lots of studies previously that when you look at the detail, it was 6 undergrads in a lab in America. And we extrapolate that all the way down to children in schools. We need to know not what works in a kind of theoretical sense, but what really works in the hurly-burly of the setting and of the school. So as you can see, these numbers here, well over 1,000 children, 100 settings, 150 settings. These are decent sizes to build some confidence that we're trying this in a real-world life, in a real-world context. And again, as I say, when we publish these, no fear or favour, and we'll publish them whether they work or not. What's exciting is we've now got trials running in Australia alongside the stuff we're doing in England. We're about to launch trials in 5 other countries together because this is a collective inquiry. There's no reason that the knowledge would be discrete, and I think this collective learning and building our knowledge together is the greatest prospect for all of us, but in a disciplined way. So just to close my introduction to the conversation, on the left-hand side, you've got bringing evidence that we already have to the table, generating new knowledge, generating wisdom, I'd prefer to say, so we can be informed professionals. When I started my job as working in a classroom, I think very much in the early 80s, I was thrown into the classroom and the head teacher said to me, Kevin, they're your children. Get on with it. You were literally left alone. I call that uninformed professionalism. That classroom, that room got me. They were unfortunate. The next room got Linda. She was amazing. That is not acceptable. When what we're saying, that the business that we're in is the most important thing done in education, and education without doubt is the most important thing we do in the world. And yet it's down to the vagaries of individuals all too often. We then, we've moved into a phase now of too much what you might call uninformed prescription coming from governments and others. What we need to move forward to, in my view, is informed professionals, using the evidence to make better decisions that benefit all children. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sir Kevin. It was a very interesting and very important presentation, which brought some key issues that we want to further explore. I picked up 2 points that I would would like to discuss further with you, all of you participants. One is the importance of the quality. It's not just the matter of providing access, but what happens to children impacts a lot in their learning and development at the early age, but also at the later stage. But also you highlighted the importance of the evidence to make informed decisions building on the evidence. and also to support the practitioners to get some insights from the evidence together with their experiences, which are also invaluable sources for the reflection. So now please join me welcoming the armchair session speakers. So please, speakers, come to the stage and seat yourself, please. So we have the pleasure to have 5 additional speakers to join this discussion. And this is a great group because I see the mixture of people who could bring some other perspectives from different point of view. We have Ms. Jana Banke, who is the head of research and quality management of the foundation Haus der Kleinen Forscher. Here. And Mr. Xavier Obrad, Chief Executive Officer of the Babylou Group. Welcome. And Professor Rebecca New, Associate Professor of Early Childhood Education, University of North Carolina, School of Education. Welcome. And also Professor Paul Lesman, Head of Education Department of Utrecht University. Welcome to the session. And finally, Mr. Jean Hubac, Director of Departmental Services under the French Ministry of National Education. Thanks for joining us. So now I invite each of the armchair speakers to give us short interventions to further enrich the discussions. And this session is further explore, as I mentioned earlier, the notion of readiness from different perspectives. And when the OECD, together with the countries, explore the issues of the transition, we address the question of readiness and how we could support the readiness of children from different perspectives, from the governance perspectives, pedagogical perspectives, children's development perspectives, but also the involvement of other stakeholders who are contributing to the child development. So I wish we could hear these different dimensions of transition from this very rich discussion which I expect. So let me introduce one by one, and some presenters have some short slides to introduce the topic. As we have very limited time, each speaker has 6 minutes, but after all interventions, we have the opportunities for discussions, including the questions that you can ask from the floor. So first, I would like to invite Jana, who is heading the research and quality management of the foundation work, but also she is very much involved in the research in this area. So Jana, please start your intervention.
Thank you, Yuri, for the invitation. And I have 2 or 3 slides, the visualization. Do I have to? Oh, yes, here we go. Thank you. So my name is Jana, and I'm a developmental psychologist. I work for the foundation Haus der Kleinen Forscher, Little Scientists' House. And this is a non-profit organization in Germany committed to improving education for children between the ages of 3 and 10 in the domains of science, technology, computer science, and mathematics, so the STEM fields. And the initiative supports early childhood teachers with a professional development program, helping them to do inquiry-based learning with children. So it's about strengthening the people who work with the children, as Kevin said before. So why do I work for this idea of early science education? And I think that engaging in exploration and scientific inquiry in early childhood fosters children's curiosity about the world and helps them to learn how to think and to find their own answers. I think it is important that children get room to experience and to explore their world and to have someone to listen to them, like a teacher who is open for inquiry and who has a positive attitude, and to support them to understand their world and to share perspectives. I think this fosters their self-esteem and encouraging children to think self-determined. And in addition to build some knowledge about the STEM field, also develop a reflected attitude towards technological and social changes. And that's very important, a basis in order to act responsibly and to find creative solutions in a world that is constantly changing. From a developmental perspective, I think it's very important to look at and take up in education what young children do already know. When they come to school, they have had like 6 years of experience in learning about the world. I did a lot of infant research, so it's tremendous knowledge they bring when they come to school. And so there are no blank papers, but they have skills and knowledge, and they're very prone, based on their better language skills, their better memory skills, self-regulation skills, to learn more consciously, more systematically, also in terms of metacognition, to know what they know and how they learned that. And I have a little example on this slide. It's a story based on Leone about the little frog who lives on the countryside, and his friend, a little fish living in the pond. And the frog is telling the fish about life ashore. And he says, "Little fish, did you know that ashore there live cows? They have 4 legs and horns. They eat grass and carry pink bags with milk with them." And as we see with this lovely cowfish, that little fish is imagining, he's integrating what he hears about cows into the knowledge structures he has about living animals, so the fish in the pond. And this is what we always do when we learn. It's constructivism. We connect to things we know. And as we also see, it might be important to get some own experience, to get the chance to do some observations, get some empirical knowledge, combine different perspectives about something in order to develop concepts that are not only opinions or something you heard, but really are grounded in some reasoning, in some observation and explanation. And I think that inquiry-based learning, where you, for example, use this inquiry cycle to do observations, trying things out, and then thinking and talking about what you've seen, is a very good way, starting on from an early age with the central experiences children can make, and then taking on more systematically in school, a way of supporting children to think, to learn how to think, and also to develop a positive and open attitude to the world, and to feel self-esteem in finding their own answers, so that it's not like a dry thing to do STEM, but to do something inquiry-based, something on your own, get the freedom to explore and find your answers. And maybe most importantly, a way to keep the openness that young children bring to the world and get some resilience also against uncertainty. We have a lot of uncertainty in the world, and we heard it in this song where the day started with chaos is surrounding us. So to give children a method or a way to know they can find their own answers, they can feel self-secure. So to deal with openness and to find solutions by inquiring and by testing things out and taking each other's perspectives and then acting responsibly together. And I think we should never underestimate in children doing that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jana. It was an important reminder that we need to think about how children actually learn and develop, and consider that when we design any programs, policies, or interventions for the practices. Thank you very much. So now we move to Xavier Ouvrade. Please prepare your headphone. I would like to make this session bilingual, but you are probably open for both English and French, but well, I admire how Canadians, switch from English to English, so I try to imitate that. Donc, Monsieur Xavier Evrard, il est directeur général de Crèche Babyleux, qui est un réseau de crèches, un des réseaux les plus importants peut-être en France, mais aussi au niveau international. Mais Xavier, il est actif dans le domaine de l'entreprise, dans différents domaines, pas seulement dans le secteur de la petite enfance, mais aussi dans le domaine de la musique. Donc, nous avons la chance d'avoir de perspectives de business pour le développement du secteur de petite enfance.
Bonjour à tous. Alors, la première chose, c'est que vous n'aurez pas de slide. Car nous, dans notre activité, nous nous occupons d'enfants de 0 à 6 ans et nous avons décidé de bannir les écrans de nos sites parce que nous savons maintenant que ce n'est pas bon pour l'éducation des enfants. Donc voilà, je vais vous parler en direct. La première chose que je voulais vous raconter, c'est une anecdote qui m'est arrivée à Dubaï où je viens de passer une année. Chez Babylou, le maître mot pour nous, c'est 2 choses, c'est développer la créativité des enfants et leur autonomie. Comme nous prenons les enfants pour des êtres tout aussi intelligents, voire plus que les adultes, nous leur expliquons notre propre mission. Je vais donc dans une crèche à Early Learning Center à Dubaï et j'explique aux enfants que ce que nous faisons, c'est de la créativité et de l'autonomie. Et il y a un enfant qui vient me voir à la fin, 4 ans, et qui me dit en anglais « Je ne comprends pas ». Parce que tu me dis qu'on doit être créatif et autonome. On prend toute la journée, on boit de l'eau dans des bouteilles en plastique. Et ici, aux Émirats Arabes Unis, nous ne sommes pas autonomes en eau. Donc, tu génères beaucoup de gâchis. La deuxième chose, c'est que tu ne m'as pas demandé mon avis sur quoi faire des bouteilles en plastique. Donc, moi, je pense que Babylou, ce n'est pas créatif. Donc, je peux vous avouer que ça m'a bien secoué. Et donc, à l'issue de cette rencontre avec ce jeune enfant de 4 ans, nous avons décidé de changer toutes les barrières de nos espaces extérieurs autour de nos crèches. Et aujourd'hui, elles sont toutes en bouteilles en plastique grâce à cet enfant, à sa créativité et à son autonomie. Ce que je voulais vous dire sur le fond, Babylou, c'est le plus grand groupe d'éducation français. À la fin de l'année, on aura 10 000 employés et 50 000 enfants accueillis dans le monde. Et ce qui est très très important pour nous, c'est que sur le 0-5 ans, on apporte une réponse globale. C'est une réponse qui travaille à la fois l'aspect moteur, l'aspect social, l'aspect cognitif. Les neurosciences nous l'ont montré, vous en avez évidemment entendu parler. 0,5 ans, c'est un potentiel absolument considérable. Et nous, ce que nous essayons de faire, c'est que nous essayons de passer du care, on va dire, de tout ce qui va être autour du social et de l'attention à la santé, à l'éducation. Et ce dont nous parlons aujourd'hui, et c'est ce que nous voyons dans les pays où nous intervenons, à l'extérieur de France notamment, et notre équipe française est très focalisée là-dessus, nous avons rebaptisé notre direction de la petite enfance la direction de l'éducation, car notre métier est un métier d'éducation. Notre premier sujet, c'est de lutter contre les inégalités. Dans notre entreprise, en France, 19,6% précisément des enfants que nous accueillons sont sous le seuil de pauvreté défini par la Caisse nationale d'allocation familiale. Nous sommes une entreprise privée, mais nous pouvons faire ça parce que nous avons dans nos clients des villes et un certain nombre de nos clients aussi qui ont une politique sociale vis-à-vis de leurs salariés. C'est extrêmement important et ça marche. Comme le disaient tout à l'heure d'autres intervenants, ça fait évoluer considérablement les potentiels des enfants. Ce qui est énorme pour nous, sur le fond aussi, c'est d'être un acteur qui soit en interaction sur des expériences multiples, sur lesquelles on puisse engager à la fois le corps et l'esprit des enfants. C'est pourquoi on a créé un référentiel qualité. Et j'insiste sur ce point-là. Vous savez que c'est un sujet très global, l'éducation d'un jeune enfant. C'est à la fois un site, des équipes, des parents. C'est quelque chose qui nécessite d'avoir un référentiel qualité pour que les professionnels dans les sites sachent à quoi se raccrocher. Nous avons une mission éducative. C'est vraiment ça notre métier. Et notre mission, c'est quoi? C'est de faire en sorte que l'enfant soit l'auteur de ces apprentissages. C'est tout un travail avec les équipes qui travaillent chez nous pour apprendre aux enfants à aller par eux-mêmes, vers la découverte de ce qui peut les aider à s'ouvrir au monde. C'est pourquoi on investit énormément sur la transition entre la crèche et l'école maternelle en France, et dans les autres pays, nous faisons du 0-6 ans. Donc on est très focalisé sur la créativité et la curiosité, et ce qui nous paraît essentiel, et moi je voudrais vraiment insister là-dessus, c'est de répondre à 3 piliers. Tout ce que nous essayons de faire, c'est de répondre à ces 3 piliers. La première chose, c'est la confiance en soi. Self-esteem. Donc tout ce que nous devons construire, c'est que l'enfant soit dans un environnement qui lui donne cette base de confiance en lui. Dès que la confiance en lui commence à arriver, on va se focaliser énormément sur le langage. On sait que la première des inégalités, c'est le langage. J'explique souvent avoir été confronté dans ma vie en tant que mentor d'un jeune de 18 ans, immigré clandestin, mal intégré, de son point de vue discriminé de fait de pratiques religieuses minoritaires dans notre pays, que son premier problème de discrimination n'était certainement pas sa couleur de peau ou sa religion, mais la manière avec laquelle il parlait français, avec des déviations de langage qui faisaient que même au téléphone, personne ne l'aurait recruté. Donc dès la toute petite enfance, le véritable sujet de l'inégalité, une fois qu'on a confiance en soi, c'est la langue. Et donc je vous donne un exemple très précis. Nous, dans nos établissements, on demande aux professionnels, quand ils parlent d'un chien, un enfant de 2 ou 3 ans, de pouvoir dire un teckel, un labrador, et d'enrichir ainsi le vocabulaire des enfants à travers des exemples extrêmement pratiques qui vont leur permettre de s'ouvrir au monde. Le troisième pilier, c'est tout simplement la relation au monde, et j'en reviens à mon exemple de départ sur l'histoire de la bouteille en plastique, et vous l'aurez compris, c'est déterminant. Aujourd'hui, je pense que dans notre métier, le point clé, c'est d'être dans l'ère du faire, to do, to make, être en capacité de mettre en pratique toute cette richesse pédagogique considérable qu'on a. Et il me semble que le continuum pédagogique entre la jeune enfance et l'école, notamment à travers une vision extrêmement précise des comportements d'acquisition du langage, est une base absolument fondamentale. Merci à tous.
Thank you very much, Xavier. From your intervention, there are very exciting issues emerging out. What is actually the learning that we expect our children want through the early learning, early childhood education and care, and also what are the competencies, knowledge, or skills that we want our children to learn. So let's keep this question for the open discussions later. But also another important point that you highlighted is the notion of agency, children as agency. We are not just pouring knowledge and skills for children to absorb, but how we could help children to be the owner and the actor of the actions to build a society together. I think this is also a key question that we need to explore. Thank you again. Now I'd like to invite Professor Rebecca New. Rebecca is, as I mentioned, associate professor, and she is in the field of ECEC teaching, so she has been teaching and teacher educators, and she's also a cultural psychologist. And she has been conducting research on cultural context of children's development and learning. Especially, she is leading longitudinal and ethnological study of Chinese and Latina immigrant parents and their interpretation of children's readiness. But also Rebecca has been actively involved in the OECD's work of Starting Strong. So please, Rebecca, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Is this working? Yes?
Yes.
My very brief comments today will focus on the concept of transitions to school with questions about who we are talking about and what we mean by the concepts of equity and readiness and innovation. My perspectives are informed by over 40 years of experience in the field of early childhood education, 30 of which have included research on cultural differences in early care, child development, parenting, and education. My perspectives today are also informed by my position as a very concerned citizen of the United States and a very proud grandmother. Collectively, these perspectives lead me to state from the outset that I find highly problematic the idea that the latest research, whether it's in neuroscience or any other form, is adequate to inform our efforts and to launch what I hope would be our collaborative inquiry. Certainly the topics of equity and social justice and inequality are not new to early care and educational discourses, and yet rote reference to such critical and complex concepts denies the possibility of alternative interpretations that challenge dominant cultural models. A good deal of my work has focused on examining different ways in which we understand, interpret, support, and define what we actually mean by a good parent, an ideal child, high quality early care and education. And I will just very briefly point to a few examples that have consumed a good deal of my time and energy and thought. Within the U.S., our cultural values of autonomy and meritocracy are reflected in and sustained by highly ethnocentric and often politically motivated research that contributes to deficit interpretations of children and their families if they do not represent the white middle class mainstream. These interpretations are often found in what is described as evidence-based best practice, even as critics of that work say that what works doesn't really actually work at all. The U.S. model of early childhood education as early intervention and compensatory not only misrepresents the multiple meanings of readiness, it denies the social and political contributions to poverty as a context for children and families, not a characteristic of the families themselves. It also flies in the face of a century of research by psychological anthropologists, sociologists, and linguists on cultural differences in children's early learning and development. The theories of cultural models has become paramount in my own way of trying to make sense of what it is that we do and what it is that motivates our decisions. If you're not familiar, I urge you to find the work of Joseph Tobin, a friend of mine who has conducted research on preschools in Japan, China, and the US, including changes in those cultures over a 20-year period, and more recently on children of immigrants in 4 European nations, Italy, France, England, and the UK and Germany. My own work in Italy was elaborated when I was invited by OECD to be the rapporteur of that country report. And surprising to some folks, there are other communities in Italy besides Reggio Emilia that take seriously their responsibility for the community's children and that reflect the cultural values of cooperation and collaboration, as well as the critical role of partecipazione, otherwise known as civic engagement, in which notions of parent involvement are elevated to a level that is unimaginable in US settings. Collectively, this research problematizes the authority of a singular type of evidence, and yet that's precisely the type of evidence that is now mandated by US educational legislation. But cultures can change, as Tobin's work on children crossing borders has demonstrated, and my own longitudinal ethnographic study of immigrant parenting as they attempt to understand, comply with, and support their children's transitions to school settings. In this context, I am keenly aware that transition is not something that happens to a child. It's an experience that is shared by the entire family. And yet parents are sometimes resistant to the progressive cultural models about which language their children should learn to speak and how. And parents are also flummoxed by teachers' interpretations of what they should be doing and expecting in their children. My daughter tells me no, as a mother from China says to me. The teacher says it is normal. My mother says it is not the Chinese way. I don't know what to do. So what are the implications of this kind of work for us? Discussions of equity and transitions are about much more than children. It's about us. The headline in the US newspaper the week before I came here quotes a UN official who says, US inequality is a political choice. human rights expert, blasted the yawning gap between the rich and the poor in the world's richest country. Inequality also varies as a function of the political context. We are not seemingly discussing what's on the front page of this newspaper. In my country, we are discussing the fact that immigrant officials are taking children away from their parents, and yet we do not discuss the continued levels of poverty that affect millions of children in the United States. We need different kinds of conversations. We need to embrace the risk. Thank you, Sir Kevin, that will be necessary as we redefine our own professional roles to engage more deeply and on a sustained period of time on what it is that we can do individually, collectively, nationally, and globally on behalf of children and their families. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. This question is actually the core of this Congress. We think together about the actions that we can take from different roles, but also what should be done together. And also you brought important perspectives to think about the role of parent and parenting as part of the holistic universe to think about the children's transition in ECC and school settings, but also at the level of family. Now I'd like to invite Professor Paul Lesman. He is head of education department of the University of Utrecht, but also he is coordinating the inclusive education and social support to tackle inequalities in society, the initiative called ESOTIS, and actively engaged in the efforts to study the early childhood care and education issues and children's development, and coordinate different projects, including the care, the curriculum and quality assessment, the impact analysis of ECEC, the European projects, among others. So, Paul, please, it's your turn. And we need a PowerPoint.
Yes. Thank you. They were already mentioned, a number of projects that I'm involved in, and I have a number of statements based on these projects, so let's go quickly through it. My presentation has a sort of undertone, and the undertone is that I'm a bit worried about our education system, especially the formal education system, which is pushed to its limits when it comes to fostering the new skills that are needed in society, but also especially when trying to reduce disparities. So this is, I think, the main thread of my talk. Can we look for new coalitions between formal and informal systems, especially the preschool, the early childhood education and care system, but also after-school programs, etc., for doing the job. So this is my tenet. Only a comprehensive and inclusive approach will work a bit and will generate benefits for society. Okay, what have we learned? Disparities, according to SES, socioeconomic status, ethnic cultural background, emerge very early, already prenatally, and well before children start preschool, and are distinct risk of irreversible adverse effects. And this requires, and we have evidence, good evidence, this is the good news, that you can do something about this, but it requires an integrated, comprehensive approach, which, if possible, starts very early, including not only ECC programs, but also family support programs, prenatal care, home visiting, education and guidance of parents, practical support, and also involving parents through home-based education programs in the raising of their children. And of course, the high quality. So, investing in early childhood provisions, both through family support and high quality early childhood education and care, is likely to generate all kinds of benefits to individuals and society, with a possibly very favorable return on investments. But, and this is a big but, only when children in disadvantaged conditions are at risk of suboptimal development and learning are effectively and massively reached. And this is a big problem in societies. Because, I hope it works, yeah. Because what we see, also in our running studies, is that there are several barriers to access. This can pertain to affordability, but affordability is often not the main reason. It's really about also cultural barriers. and cultural barriers to access to high-quality early childhood care and education, but also, for instance, to parental involvement in school later on, has to do with mechanisms we are not always aware of, but sometimes we are fully aware of it. It's an explicit policy that basically expels parents from different cultural backgrounds from our systems. So although learning a country's main language and cultural norms and values is a very legitimate goal for early childhood education and care, as for primary education, a too predominant assimilationist model risks to be exclusionary, especially when it concerns heritage language and cultural religious customs, when they are ignored, devaluated, or suppressed. Parent preschool partnerships is a way of addressing this. If you build on families' resources, for instance, make use of the heritage languages and the cultural knowledge, use of digital tools involving multimedia, translation functions to overcome communication difficulties is a very good strategy, which we investigate in our ongoing projects. Let's go, so we have a few minutes left. What do we mean by high-quality preschool and daycare programs? And this relates to the theme of this session. I think it relates especially to a balanced curriculum, which serves holistic development. So here's a list of things that should be in it. And when I'm talking about the early childhood care and education sector, I'm quite optimistic because we have seen a lot of innovation and improvement the past decades. And this is a point to keep in mind. Why is this sector indeed capable of innovating itself, improving its quality? What are the regulating mechanisms? What is the driving force? And I would like to ask the nasty question, why don't we see the same development in the education system, in the formal education system? Right. Ideally, this holistic approach should be continued in school programs, but there are several limits. Sometimes they are perceived only, but maybe there are real limits. And that's why I think that we should look for new arrangements in which we do not put the burden of doing all the good things, like reducing inequalities or preparing new generations for the current century. That we should not put all the burden on the school system, but look for new arrangements, collaborations between schools and after-school programs, cultural organizations, even companies, could be a way of addressing the limitations that schools are facing. It's also, in my view, a public response to what we see as a phenomenon in many countries, the increasing so-called shadow education. Parents looking for extracurricular activities to raise their children, to create better opportunities for them in society, which is, of course, depending also on what they can afford. And that's why it is a big risk for society. It increases new segregations and new inequalities. So that's my point. I would like to leave it here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Paul, you also made a call for reflection in terms of the equity issues, how we could make sure of the quality learning and development for children regardless of their background. So we will come back to that point. But also I picked up one small comment that you made, but I think it's important, which is the use of technology. When we tackling the issues of equity, sometimes technology is seen as the evil part of the picture, but actually technology has potential to support the disadvantaged families, parents, and children if it is used in a purposeful way. So probably we can bring that to the later discussion. Finally, but not the least, Jean Hubac, I will switch back to French again. Jean est le directeur des services départementaux de l'éducation nationale. Nous avons la chance d'avoir quelqu'un qui gère le système au niveau départemental. Et il a aussi enseigné pendant 10 ans aux différents niveaux de l'éducation, du collège, du lycée, de l'université.
In both high school and middle school and at university levels. So you're a man of experience, you know what the reality of teaching is, and Jean also has experience from the administrative point of view as well.
Merci.
Jean, you have the floor.
Est-ce que les diapositives Oui. Voilà, donc je voudrais partager avec vous une expérience qui est menée actuellement dans le département de la Somme et qui concerne... enfin, le département de la Somme est un département qui accueille environ 85 000 élèves dans l'enseignement public de 2 ans à 16 ans, donc sans compter le lycée. Et nous faisons le pari dans le département d'un changement de paradigme initié par l'éducation nationale, ce qui est une réponse aussi à des choses que j'ai pu entendre depuis ce matin, autour d'un dispositif qui s'appelle le dispositif de discipline positive, dont je voudrais vous dire 2 mots avant de vous expliquer comment on a fait dans la Somme concrètement. La discipline positive, je voudrais préciser d'abord que c'est une éthique. C'est une éthique comportementale et professionnelle, du décentrement, de l'empathie et de la recherche du bien commun éducatif. Et à ce titre-là, on va le voir, ça passe évidemment par un effet sur les élèves, mais un effet sur les adultes aussi qui font partie de la communauté éducative. C'est à la fois une manière d'être, une manière de faire, et ça revient sur des choses qui ont déjà été dites ce matin, et c'est aussi une manière de dire et de faire dire. C'est aussi un ensemble d'outils dont je ne passerai pas en revue évidemment la somme ici, et une méthode qui, contrairement à ce que son nom indique ou ce que certains peuvent dire d'un premier abord, n'est ni permissive ni punitive et qui permet de développer les compétences psychosociales chez les enfants. Et donc le pari que nous faisons, c'est qu'avec la discipline positive, on pourra permettre le bien-être à l'école, mais aussi développer le bien-être par l'école. Alors c'est un pari ambitieux, hein, je suis bien d'accord, mais en même temps c'est un pari que je pense qu'il faut que nous tenions tous ensemble et qui est fondé sur des expériences déjà qui ont fait leur preuve ailleurs. Alors, sans revenir très rapidement sur l'origine, ce sont 2 psychiatres autrichiens qui sont à l'origine de ce projet discipline positive et qui a été développé ensuite par Jane Nelson et Lynn Lott dans un certain nombre d'ouvrages. Alors, rapidement, sur les principes de la discipline positive, le premier aspect, c'est que le respect devient un projet collectif qui est porté par l'ensemble de la communauté scolaire. Donc, c'est la notion de respect mutuel, hein, c'est-à-dire de la dignité de soi-même et de la dignité d'autrui. Et c'est ce projet collectif, là aussi pour rebondir sur ce qui a pu être dit ce matin, qui permet de donner du sens à l'ensemble des actions qui sont menées à l'interne dans une structure éducative. Et comme tout projet, il présuppose bien évidemment une adhésion volontaire. C'est aussi un équilibre parfois subtil entre la bienveillance et l'exigence, ce à quoi l'école essaye de s'employer tous les jours, et qui donc ne transige pas sur l'exigence au nom de la bienveillance, puisque être exigeant avec les enfants, c'est aussi être bienveillant avec eux par bien des aspects. C'est aussi une démarche qui permet de faire prévaloir la recherche de solutions sur les punitions et les sanctions quand on est confronté à des problèmes ou à des difficultés. Et je peux vous assurer que dans le système éducatif français, nous sommes encore sur des réflexes de punition et de sanctions, et ça demande beaucoup d'énergie. C'est aussi la mise en œuvre d'actions spécifiques, actives et explicites, je rajouterai aussi volontiers régulières et fréquentes. C'est la garantie c'est garantir et faire vivre tous ensemble la parité d'estime entre êtres humains à l'intérieur de la communauté éducative. C'est croire et redire sans cesse, croire en l'éducabilité illimitée des enfants et des adultes, puisque c'est un dispositif qui permet aux adultes de réfléchir autrement à la manière dont ils approchent les enfants. C'est aussi faire de l'erreur un levier de progrès et d'apprentissage, et j'ai envie de dire c'est aussi faire de l'expression des émotions un support d'apprentissage. Et enfin, c'est mettre en œuvre une formation globale et systémique. Dans la Somme, depuis 2 ans, nous avons formé un peu plus de 300 personnes qui sont d'abord les personnels d'encadrement de l'éducation nationale. Et je tiens ici à remercier vivement Anne-Sophie Pourchet, ma conseillère technique, qui a pris ce projet en charge, et les formateurs certifiés qui sont... Madame Godin est présente dans la salle, qui au quotidien œuvrent auprès des équipes de l'éducation nationale pour les former à la discipline positive. Donc plus de 300 personnes, ça représente un déploiement important, puisque ils sont répartis dans une trentaine, un peu plus de 30 structures éducatives dans le département. Alors, les effets de la discipline positive, bon, évidemment, le premier effet, c'est de développer les compétences psychosociales dont les enfants ont largement besoin, mais dont les adultes aussi ont besoin de renforcer parfois l'expressivité. C'est le renforcement de la confiance en soi et de l'estime de soi, hein, dans une continuité en quelque sorte avec le réseau des crèches Babylou, et puis une continuité avec des préceptes antiques, hein, c'est le connais-toi toi-même finalement pour mieux connaître les autres. C'est le développement de la responsabilité et de l'autonomie individuelle qu'on essaie de ne pas perdre au fur et à mesure de l'avancée en âge de l'enfant, ce qui n'est pas une mince affaire du côté des adultes. Le renforcement de la cohésion de groupe et de la coopération dans la classe, dans la cour, mais aussi dans l'ensemble de l'école ou du collège, pour développer le sentiment d'appartenance. C'est, in fine, évidemment favoriser la réussite scolaire, assurer la sérénité de nous, ce qu'on appelle le climat scolaire et qui comprend les parents. À ce titre, d'ailleurs, nous formons aussi des parents. Nous avons des groupes avec les parents en partenariat avec le conseil départemental pour que la formation soit réellement complète. Et enfin, et je crois que cette notion est absolument fondamentale et centrale, garantir et fonder la démocratie scolaire, avec deux aspects. L'un, c'est la garantie de la liberté individuelle, et en même temps, dans un cadre d'ordre collectif, mais qui est aussi la garantie de l'expression de la liberté individuelle. Voilà, et donc je ne sais pas si ça peut être dupliqué partout, parce que pour les garanties de la réussite de ce type de dispositif, c'est évidemment des femmes, des hommes et des enfants qui sont investis, mais c'est aussi du temps, de l'argent, et nous bénéficions du programme d'investissement d'avenir du nord de la France qui finance une partie des formations, et c'est aussi beaucoup de conviction pour arriver à faire bouger, à faire changer de paradigme l'école française dans l'ensemble des territoires qui en ont tous besoin. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, John. Vous avez aussi apporté un point très important quand on parle de la qualité de la petite enfance. On ne peut pas discuter sans porter l'attention sur les pratiques pédagogiques, et la discipline positive est une approche qu'on entend de plus en plus quand on parle d'amélioration de la pratique et le soutien de l'enfant. Mais encore une fois, ça c'est une question à approfondir. Quelles sont des approches pédagogiques appropriées pour quel objectif, dans quel contexte, donc c'est à explorer. So now we are close to the end of this session. I have a difficult trade-off to make. Either we leave you enough time for lunch, for your well-being, or continue the discussions. So I would like to just propose one cross-cutting questions and invite speakers, if you would like to comment, then just, briefly 1 minute each. And if you want to skip, no problem for that. So the overarching and cross-cutting question that I have picked up is the question of equity and inclusiveness. We have heard from many speakers that this is an important issue, but we still have lots of challenges. So from your perspectives, please further think about and especially suggest for our future actions. What are the most important challenges to make sure of the equity and inclusiveness in transition from early childhood education and care to schooling? And you can focus on the perspectives, for example, or suggestions for ministers, policymakers, or parents, or practitioners, researchers. So you can just, give any focus, but the topic is equity. But also I received one question from the audience, particularly for Jean, whether practice of educators and teachers are actually ready for change to improve the practices in classrooms, in kindergartens, in childcare centers. So what are the challenges to actually change and improve the practices at the level of teachers and educators? So if you could consider this and think about, but just a few words, who could take this challenge?
Just in a few words, something which is really very important for me. is to celebrate success. I just wanted to highlight the fact that in our sector, the bigger inequality is to celebrate the success. You perfectly know that when you're successful because you're coming from a very high-end family, you will celebrate your success. Your parents have this ability. So the most important for us is that every month we have a specific session, or every week a specific session to celebrate the success of each kid. And it can be some different types of success. And as soon as you have equality in success, everybody at group level can really be sure that he gets abilities, trust, and self-confidence to be able to build the world of tomorrow. For me, it's the main topic, and this is why I put this notion of success and not mistakes like the core of our education goals.
Very good point. Thank you very much. Who else? Kevin?
I'd add to that, and I add the word trust. I think that when most children thrive and do well, but we know from the equity data that there is a good number of children who don't. So whenever you begin working with children, the big question is who tells you what to do, and on what basis do they tell you? Who do you trust to guide you to make different decisions that we know make a bigger difference for those children? So for me, it's about trust and knowing that what you're doing actually makes the difference you think it does.
Thank you.
Je pense qu'il y a deux maîtres mots aujourd'hui pour l'éducation nationale, en France au moins. C'est la formation. Il faut que nous arrivions à améliorer nos dispositifs de formation pour accompagner les enseignants. Et deux, et là c'est pas une méthodologie mais c'est plutôt un objectif, c'est celui de la coéducation. On ne cesse de dire depuis ce matin, finalement on a des acteurs différents qui interviennent et qui interviennent tous au bénéfice finalement des mêmes personnes, c'est-à-dire des enfants. Il faut que nous en ayons bien conscience. Nous n'avons pas le monopole dans l'éducation nationale de l'éducation. Nous ne le partageons pas uniquement avec les parents, mais nous avons aussi bon nombre de partenaires. Et je pense que là-dessus, au moins pour le diagnostic, nous avons beaucoup progressé. Maintenant, pour la mise en œuvre, nous avons encore du chemin à faire. Et je pense que ce que nous arrivons à faire à un niveau de mise en relation des partenaires dans la discussion, il faut qu'on arrive à le rendre concret dans les écoles, dans les territoires, dans l'école qui est un lieu de vie parmi d'autres, qui est un lieu de passage pour les enfants, mais je pense vraiment qu'il faut qu'on arrive à avancer de ce point de vue-là.
Excellent, thank you. Any other comments?
I think in terms of equity, when we think about children, let's not forget the adults, and let's support those professionals who work with children. Every day, I think they need practical support and emotional support, and also financial support to do the great job that we're hopefully expecting. So.
Good. Rebecca?
Yes, I actually had some of these thoughts on the last page of my notes, which I didn't get to look at. In particular, I was provoked by Sir Kevin's comments about our need to learn how to play together, and also the importance of taking risk, whether it's on a motorcycle or learning how to have a conversation with someone whose cultural practices seem horrendously inappropriate and out of line with what your views are about how best to care for young children and to be a good parent and a healthy family. The title of this session had the question, a revolution, at the very end. And I think that is what we're talking about. I think that we as adults have new languages to learn and new social skills to acquire, so that we can consider our efforts on behalf of equity within the actual context where inequities are taking place, because there is no way that I can compare what is happening with the Rohingya children today and what is happening with children in the United States, and yet there are inequities any way that we're looking. Our responses have to be grounded in terms of what it is that those individual families and communities need. And I will again harken back to Sir Kevin's comments about how difficult it is to behave in a way that isn't who you are. And yet we often advise families to do exactly that.
Great point, thank you. Paul, I know that you have prepared many other ideas to present. Would you like to add some comment?
I was thinking about this sacred tradition in France that lunch should be preserved, and I wanted to be culture sensitive. I come from the northern part of Europe, and there things are different, you know. But still, if you invited me,
yeah,
so I really think that I'm really so. My personal view is that we should look at new ways of organizing our educational systems. This is a bit a macro type of recommendation, but it's also a bit based on 25 years of increasing frustration about what the formal education system can do. And many policies, many programs, a lot of money went into it. Sometimes it was based on solid evidence, but then what was proven in an RCT didn't work out in the larger context of the reality of many schools and neighborhoods, etc., changing populations, student populations, etc. So, and one of the things that we are studying in our ongoing projects is that this idea of schools as a professional bureaucracy. It's an organizational model which gives us all kinds of advantages. So there's a lot of standardization, there's good quality control, etc. But it is also limiting innovation. And it's also leading currently to job experiences, job appraisals by teachers, which are not very positive. Teachers feel limited in many ways. Focusing on the basic skills, which is a demand coming from the central level of the country. Assimilationist demands often in many countries, and this is not the reality where teachers have to work in. Teachers work in colored neighborhoods. They work with families with different cultural backgrounds. It's super diverse what is happening in our cities. And so schools are not well prepared. Not the teachers, not the schools as such, but especially the system as such. So my recommendation is let's look at new ways of creating coalitions which can improve innovation. Where this is not like just an idea that came up. It's also based on our analysis how things work in a partly privatized preschool sector, in which you have, of course, the excesses of commercial enterprises doing bad things, but you also have entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, which I think is a good model to think about. How should we try to address the limitations of the current formal education system?
Thank you very much. So I'd like to express our thanks to all the speakers. It was a very inspiring sharing of insights, and we are looking forward to continue the discussions after lunch. Thank you very much.